It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting through my website, emailrevealer.com. Or you could just email me at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. If you like our show, be sure and check out our Patreon, Opperman Report Patreon, where we have all the content you hear Monday to Friday, AM/FM radio. We put up on Patreon ad-free. We cut out all the commercials. And, of course, you can find our archives over at Spreaker.com. And that's where we put up all the free archives. And I do a live show there every Friday night, exclusive just to Spreaker. As a matter of fact, if you go to Spreaker and you Google people like St. John Hunt or Frank Sturgis or Rothstein, you're going to hear a lot of the stuff we're going to be talking about today with our guest, Francis Richard Conolly. Now, you definitely know this guy's, he did a film called JFK to 9/11, Everything's a Rich Man's Trick. And I can remember when it first came out, it was constantly being told, hey, Ed, you got to watch this, you got to watch this, you got to watch this. Got a book coming out now on Trine Day, TrineDay.com, good old Chris Milligan. And the book is called JFK to 9/11, Everything's a Rich Man's Trick. It's getting great reviews. Mr. Conolly, are you there?
I am, Ed. Good evening, and good evening to all your American listeners. It's very nice of you to have me on the show.
Thank you so much. I've been trying to get you. Tell the audience, who is Francis Richard Conolly?
Ooh, that's scary.
Yeah.
to answer a question as bland as that, that's a real invitation to put your foot in it. But Francis Richard Conolly, I was born in the northeast of England to a dock worker and a nurse in a very working class home. I come from a place called Wallsend, which is at the end of Hadrian's Wall. That's where the wall actually ends. There was a big pile of bricks there that told you about the Romans when I was a child. So that's where it all started out. Born in the shadow of a shipyard, just like my namesake Billy Connolly, and the rock star Sting, who your audience, they're all going to know him. He actually used to deliver my milk when I was a child, which is a hell of a connection. And I don't want to, start getting immodest here, but what can I say? I was one of those boys at school who had ability and got punished for it. Put it that way. I was always kind of put down for being an artist and wanting to be an artist. I always knew I wanted to be a writer. I was a good painter when I was at school, and I was there's a great line that you could probably relate to yourself in Chinatown, where a detective is talking to Jack Nicholson and saying to him, sometimes it takes a man a while to find himself. I didn't start to find myself until I went to university. When I did, everything started to fall into place. That was where I began writing. And to cut a very long story short, I wound up finally working for the BBC as a dramatist, and wrote quite a successful play. Well, actually, it was a very successful radio play called Funny How We Don't Talk Anymore. But I realized at that time that the political atmosphere that we have now, and now we feel so keenly, the political atmosphere was turning sour just at the beginning of my writing career. I could feel it. Writers were being pushed around, they were being bullied, they were being told what to do, and I myself was told I had to write one of those medical dramas. I'm sure you have the equivalent in America. And I didn't want to do that. And basically, that was it. I was then plagiarized by Paramount Pictures over a Star Trek script and thought, well, this world obviously doesn't want me. Again, to compress the whole thing, not long after that, a gentleman who works in the media phoned me up one afternoon when I was in the middle of a screenplay that I was writing for David Parfit, the man who produced Shakespeare in Love. It looked like I was going to be able to make a deal with him at the time. And I was right in the middle of that screenplay, so that was where my head was. And he phoned me up and said, "You got to turn on your TV." And no, come on, I'm busy. Go away. No. He said, "Something's happened. Turn on your TV." And there was 9/11. And well, to put it mildly, everybody knows what's happened in the world and to me since then. So that's about as much as I can compress it. Is that okay?
No, that's fine. Now, it seems like I have a lot of people on the show. We discuss these kind of topics all the time. And a lot of people will say, well, I first became awake, I first became aware, started looking into all the things after 9/11. But then there's another crew of people that kind of got aware of all this stuff, looking into the JFK assassination. How did you first, because your book, by the way, people should understand, it's way more than just JFK to 9/11. It goes way back throughout history, Skull and Bones, Nazism, a lot about World War II, the railroads, Harriman and the railroads, all this kind of stuff too. So there's a lot more in there than just JFK to 9/11. But when did you start getting tuned into what's going on here?
On the day of the assassination, that's when it really. I've got a technical problem here. That's when it really kicked off. And I was talking to my publisher, who you've just mentioned, Chris Milligan, for his radio podcast, and what I brought up there was that every child, I think, has some event in their childhood where they're traumatized. Sometimes it's because their father hits them when they thought they didn't deserve it, or they see their father hit their mother. I remember the Richard Conolly interview where he said, he related this thing where his father would come in from working as a brakeman on the railroads, and he would beat him up with his fists when he was like 8 years old. And then when he went crying to his mother would hit him with a broomstick. And that was how they manufactured the monster that was Richard Conolly. It was a terribly sad story. The big dramatic and traumatic event of my childhood was the Kennedy assassination. It hit me so hard because it hit the community that I lived in so terribly hard. It never occurred to me until years later that part of the reason was that I was brought up as an Irish Catholic, and my mother came from a place called Galbally, which wasn't too far away from where Patrick Kennedy, the Kennedy oligarch, I beg your pardon, patriarch, oh geez, what did I say? The Kennedy patriarch, that was where he began, and so I think that without even realizing it, I felt some kind of kinship with the whole Kennedy clan, really. So that like I say, the trauma on the day hit me so terribly hard. It was terribly upsetting. It went on for months, and it never let me go. And I have related in the book that later on when we studied the Kennedy assassination in school, I was never, ever satisfied with anything that I heard about it. Every time that there was anything on British television, it always seemed to me to be avoiding the issue, always seemed to be muddled. It always seemed to be produced by people who didn't know what the hell they were talking about. And so, because I'm a writer, I couldn't let it go. And it was one of those things, why did it grab me so much? I don't even know if a psychologist could ever figure it out, but it was just one of those things. I had to know the truth. I just had to. I'm sure there's millions of people out there who will be nodding their heads as they listen to my voice, thinking, well, yeah, that's exactly how I feel. And I just kept grinding away, reading everything I could, finding every scrap of information, until the day that finally I got it.
No, I was just watching the film yesterday, and it seems like you glorify the Kennedys, that you think that they were very good men, and not involved in because you also talk a lot about organized crime too. But then tomorrow I'm having a guest on, Mike Rothmiller, who's a former LAPD intelligence officer, and he's talking about his new book about the murder of Marilyn Monroe. So now, what do you make, though, of the Kennedys and their involvement with Frank Sinatra and all those all those characters and the allegations of the Marilyn Monroe murder?
Well, that's been very well gone into in several books that I've looked at. If any of your listeners want to sort of have closure or some kind of satisfaction as to what really went on with that, I suggest they read Double Cross by Sam Giancana Jr. I'm not saying that one can never discuss this. Don't get me wrong, or that is the last word. You know, we're talking about the shadow world of intelligence, and right from the very beginning of this, the very first warning that I was given by Malcolm Brinkworth, because he was the first big producer who would talk to me about this. The very first thing he said to me was, "There's disinformation in everything," and there absolutely is. But you know, I have looked at all of the information on every one that you can get hold of. I've read about, you know, Kennedy's private life, looked at Ted Kennedy's private life, etc., etc., etc. I think that if a fair man and an objective man approaches the entire history of that period, I don't think you can come to any other conclusion other than that when you find negative things, negative innuendo, any suggestion that the Kennedy brothers were in any sense bent or in any sense were, you know, gangsters themselves, I think that what you find is misinformation. I could not have been clearer about his father. You know, Joseph P. Kennedy was definitely involved with the mafia. He was a bootlegger. That's why they called him Bootlegger Joe. Yes, he was rough stuff, and yes, the picture painted of him up until my work anyway was a very false one, because he was ambassador to Britain. But nobody's ever presented to me any other evidence other than that Marilyn Monroe was murdered by once again this sinister, you know, joining of the CIA and organized crime. I've never seen anything else that would convince me otherwise. I do think that from the autopsy reports and various other sources that it looked like she was murdered by some kind of poison suppository, which is the most disgusting and vile way you could ever imagine to kill a beautiful woman. I do think that's how it's done. You may have other information, but that's how I think it was done. I don't glorify or deify the Kennedys in any way. I don't do that to anyone, Ed. They were men. They were men living in a very dirty society at a very, very difficult time in history, who were just doing their best. I don't, you know, put any kind of sainthood or any kind of halo around the head of Bobby Kennedy or Jack Kennedy. I know they were just men, but I do believe that the pair of them were very special, because they were, for that period in history, exceptionally bright. And the fact that JFK ever got to the presidency proves it. I do believe that he outwitted the mafia. I don't think, as I say, that either man was a saint, but I don't believe that either that they ever did anything unsavory in order to get to power or to maintain power. That I do not believe. And I think that if they ever had, well, they wouldn't have been murdered. They wouldn't have been assassinated. They were assassinated because they were good, Ed. That's what I believe.
You get into very deeply into the Kennedy assassination. In fact, I would say the majority of the movie is the majority of the book about the Kennedy assassination as well.
Well, yes, it is. I mean, the history that you referred to, that goes all the way back to, the Skull and Bones, before the First World War. That's still all there, and the assassination details are still there in the book. What I've tried to do in the book at the end is to bring everything up to date with what we're seeing at the moment, with this whole thing with Ghislaine Maxwell and Prince Andrew and this alleged upcoming trial. Right at this moment, Ed, I wish I had millions of dollars to hire you so that you could hire a team and somehow find out whether Ghislaine Maxwell is really incarcerated at the MDC. Because I just do not believe it. No one yet has shown me a scrap of evidence to make me think that she is really in prison. Not from the very beginning has there been a scrap of evidence that she's really in prison. And I personally think that the establishment, and by which I mean the Anglo-American establishment, not just the British establishment, I personally think the Anglo-American establishment is in a position right now where they are absolutely, shall I say, filling their pants with it. That they won't have enough toilet paper at the moment because somehow I think, and I would give anything to be proven wrong about this, and they know it. This is why I'm saying it. But I think that somehow they are scratching their heads until their heads have fallen off to try and think of some excuse that they can bring forward to the American public, to the British public, whereby they're going to be able to say, oh, guess what, everybody, Ghislaine Maxwell's not going to be appearing. There's not going to be a trial because she slipped on the soap or she got COVID or some stupid excuse. And because they know the public are just not going to buy it, Ed, not after what happened with Jeffrey Epstein. They know that the public are not going to buy it. So, to put it mildly, this coming couple of months, especially now that Prince Andrew has chosen to default with his civil case, which is what I anticipated, what I predicted just a few days ago, it's going to be very interesting the next few months, how things turn out.
Again, talk about it's a small world. I've actually been in that jail, the MDC. Okay, I've interviewed.
Yeah.
I've interviewed defendants there, and also too one of my guests, Stephen Hoffenberg, who was Epstein's ex-business partner. He spent time over there at MDC as well. And also we were talking before about A.J. Weberman, who wrote Coup d'Etat in America. He also went to MDC. So it's like old home week here at the Operative Report. Let's share our examples. But now, some questions in the JFK community, okay? And there's so many researchers now, especially now with the internet, it's gotten even more elaborate, and there's so much. People don't disagree with each other. People are examining, counting the heads on a pin. How is your theories received, especially the theory about the Secret Service driver turning around and firing that shot?
How are they received?
Yeah.
In what sense, Ed?
Is that widely agreed with?
Just that one particular detail?
Yeah, to start with. I'm starting with that.
Well, I would say that, as I think all of your listeners know, when my movie first gathered pace, if you want to put it that way, it first started going viral. It was shooting up into the millions of hits, and there was this lovely man, Rick Thorne, and I've just noticed all of his videos have disappeared. I'd love to know about that, but Rick Thorne took segments of my movie, about 15 minutes long, 10 minutes long, 20 minutes long, and he put them out separately on the internet, and with all of these different versions that were sprouting up all over the place. I mean, you talk about people, how was it received? I mean, there was so much agreement. All of these different versions were adding up to around 50 million hits. Then I was on Raconteurs News, which I was just on a couple of days ago with Jason, and Andy Young, my host, told me everything was being underreported by 200 times. And I fell off my chair during the interview. I just could not even hear it in the interview. I could not get over it because it immediately struck me. Well, that must mean that it's been, watched over 1 billion times. So in terms of how is that detail, that particular detail, and all the other details being received, I would say that it's overwhelmingly that people have agreed with it and have been glad of the information.
Now, also too, and I'd like you to really to elaborate on this and explain to the audience. In your publication, you have a theory that Tippit was used as a double with JFK, and the body was actually replaced, and there was some surgery done on the plane. And I've had another guest on the show. I've heard this story before about the hospital, and there was all this driving around, all kind of weird stuff going on, but never to the depth that you've portrayed here in your book. Can you explain that whole story about how you believe that JFK's body was, they did surgery on the plane, and it was some kind of a swapping with Tippit's body parts?
Well, when I was putting that together, I was simply using logic, Ed. That was all. I was, going over this with a fine-tooth comb because most of the details that people are now familiar with during that section of the film came from the work of David Lifton. And no one ever reads his book because, as I've said, I think in other interviews, most people couldn't lift it. It weighs a ton. It's absolutely huge. This amazing work where he has this protagonist all the way through called Leslie J. Weebeler, this awful man who he's sort of fighting all the way through. And but Lifton's work was just absolutely outstanding. And when I was looking at what was known to have happened, what you could, I would say you could prove in a court of law in Dallas, and then when I was looking at what was then happening at Bethesda, especially the way that the military chiefs were behaving at Bethesda, it seemed to me that there was no other logical conclusion. When you read, as I have so many times, the testimony of Commander Humes and all the games that were played, during the autopsy at Bethesda, it seemed to me that there was no other logical conclusion other than this whole grisly business with Liggett had to have taken place on the aeroplane. There was no other time to do it. Liggett could not have been, anywhere else, and he couldn't have been working at any other time. And he wasn't, as I've said in the film, given long enough. And this is why, when the body got to Humes, this was why he had to write down that the moment he touched the skull, pieces of the skull fell down onto the autopsy table. So, once you've put all of that evidence, all that written down evidence together, then I don't think that there's any other conclusion other than that this very strange figure, Liggett, was hired to do what he did with the two bodies on the plane, and his wife's testimony, which is so detailed, Ed. Lois Liggett, that was why in the film I let her speak so much and let her go into such detail about how her husband was behaving so out of character, especially this whole thing about him coming back with disarrayed clothing and looking completely in a mess. And she said that was so out of character for him. I do think that, put it this way, there's nothing I would like more than for some powerful and brilliant American attorney to read my book, look at the film, and say this is the basis for a prosecution of the United States government by the people. And for this whole thing to go to court and for me to be able, and the attorney obviously, to present what I've said in that section to an American jury to see if they agree that this logically is what must have happened, given the evidence, given what was written down in Dallas. There were so many police reports, like on Jack Lawrence, and given what was written down at Bethesda, I do think that I could convince a jury that this whole hideous, degenerate thing that went on with using the policeman's body to try and make people think.
Well, let's stop here for a sec. So, Francis, I really I want you to lay out your theory about Tippit and Kennedy and the bodies being swapped and surgery being done on the plane.
Well, it's not a theory, Ed. It isn't. It must have been that way. And they did this because they knew beforehand that they had to control the body after the assassination to make it appear that the body was shot from where they said the shots came from. That was why it was done. And talking about the police officer, there's no doubt in my mind that he was murdered by G. Gordon Liddy. All of the sources that I've, and I'd rather not go into that, but all of the sources seem to point in that direction. Some of your listeners may know about G. Gordon Liddy, some may not. But the reason I always pegged him as a perfect candidate for an assassin was because his character was very, very well known to his law enforcement and legal profession colleagues. This was a man he shot a gun in a courtroom, and he burned his skin at parties. This is something that's in the movie about Watergate. He did crazy macho things. He was quite obviously unbalanced. He took machismo to the same kind of level as Frank Sturgis, put it that way. Your listeners have got to understand that in every single generation, it is very, very difficult to find reliable assassins. There are in this world professional thinking men like you and I, who are good at what we do, and we're good talkers and good writers and all of that kind of thing. But I don't think that you could bring yourself to assassinate a man for any amount of money, and I certainly couldn't. And you would find that in this world, 99.9999% of professional men feel that way. Now, on the other hand, there are plenty of thugs in this world. There are lots of thugs. It's not difficult to find a thug. It's not difficult to find a psychopath. But to find a psychopath who has had professional training and is both reliable and fearless, that is a desperately difficult thing to find. And that's why men like Frank Sturgis and men like G. Gordon Liddy are so valuable to oligarchs who want assassinations carrying out. And there are not many men like that. And knowing their character is very important. So that is why I believe, that's why I always believed that those two men were involved in the assassination, and nothing has come along since I put the movie out. Not one shred of anything has any critic managed to show me that gives me any reason to think that I was wrong.
Hey, what about this latest revelation just came out last week about that guy? They call him the Monkey, who was one of the Bear Pigs guys, and he claims that he was involved in the JFK assassination. Did you have him pegged as one of the shooters?
Oh, tell me more about this, Ed. The Monkey? What's this about? Before.
Yeah, it just came out just the other day that he told his sons that he was involved in the JFK assassination, and he was one of these Cuban. I'm definitely not going to remember his name right now. I can promise you that. But it was one of those Cuban exiles that was involved with Bear Pigs and the Alpha 66, Omega, whatever that was. All those terrorist groups. Right, Corrado, all those guys. Okay, but that brings us to this, because you're talking about these assassins, and you focus a lot on the shooters in the movie, in the book. And it turns out that there's this crew of guys, Operation 40, this crew of guys who started out with the Bay of Pigs, and then later on did JFK, and then later on were involved in Watergate. Can you describe who this crew of characters were?
Well, the basic crew, if you want to put it that way, centered around Sturgis and Liddy. And the most important coordinator was E. Howard Hunt. In the movie All the President's Men, that was where I first started to learn that he was involved with the CIA from '59 through to Watergate. And looking at E. Howard Hunt's life, his background, and what his professional life was, I would say that he was the most important coordinator of men like Bernard Barker, the other Watergate burglar, and men like Chauncey Holt, who again, that's another man who admitted his involvement in the assassination. It was actually very frustrating for me, Ed, when I was putting the movie together. I wanted to include Chauncey Holt's confession. That anybody can go online. If someone's listening to me at home right now, I would invite them. Bring up a window on your computer, put in Chauncey Holt's car park conversation or wherever it was, and he wanders around that car park behind the grassy knoll, explaining to a man his involvement. So you have Chauncey Holt's confession. You've then got the confession of Woody Harrelson's dad, Charles Lloyd Harrelson, and you've got Marita Lorenz saying that Frank Sturgis told her, well, who gives a damn? Yes, I did it. No one's going to prove it. And she had given evidence under oath to that effect as well. So, I don't see how anyone now can possibly doubt that there was a conspiracy. That is beyond question. And my personal take is that, as I say, that E. Howard Hunt was the most important coordinator, along with George Bush and Jack Alston Crichton.
Yeah, the Cuban I was talking about is Ricardo Morales, known as the Monkey. Yeah, I know.
I'd like to hear I'd like to know what the source was, and I'd like to know what Morales was accused of doing. I wouldn't immediately discount that he could have been part of one of the assassination teams. I wouldn't completely discount that, because there definitely was Cuban involvement, as I have absolutely stated in the film. But I would like to know, as I say, where whoever has got that, because they are constantly trying to bring misinformation and disinformation into this thing, Ed, and to therefore keep spinning it out. I do not want it spun out now. As far as I'm concerned, I am a man who has solved the riddle once and for all time. What I want to do now is to move on and explain why it was done to the American people and to the world, and for what purposes, and and who did it. Because, as you said earlier, it all comes down to what effect did it have on us? Why do we live the way we live? That's what I think is important to tell your listeners now.
No, I agree. We only have about 9 minutes left in this segment. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a two-part segment with Richard Conolly, author of JFK to 9/11, Everything's a Rich Man's Game. So tell us, throughout history, how do we get into this position we are in right now? We have this 1% ruling us, and now things are just getting worse by the day. The rents here in the United States is just getting astronomical. We're having inflation. Gasoline prices are going up. And a lot of this, the people behind this is the oil industry, correct?
Well, it's the oil men and the bankers mainly, Ed. But the question that you asked first, I come up against this all the time. I came up against it with Justin Stellman when he interviewed me, and I think that was one of my better interviews. If somebody wants to check that out, JSP7 with Justin Stellman and myself, I do think that that's an interview that's worth looking into. And as I say, that basic question that you've started out with. How is it that this has been going on for thousands of years, and how is it that we're still struggling with it now? And because I think a hell of a lot of people out there realize that this is human history. It's all about the 1%. Well, actually, it's nothing like the richest 1%. It's far fewer than 1%. But you always have, and George Orwell understood this, you always have just a tiny little number of oligarchs keeping all the money to themselves, while the rest of us have to live on peanuts. And in order to understand how that whole situation began and how it's been maintained right up until modern day, I still need to make another film to explain that. What I do want your listeners to understand about the way that things are now is that it is all of it, 100% of it, nothing but a rich man's trick. All of it, because it is totally unnecessary. I want your listeners to know this one fact. We could all be millionaires. The entire population of North America, everyone could be a millionaire right now, if American society was directed to that end. It is possible. It could be done. And the reason it could be done is that we are so efficient in terms of industrial productivity in this digital age. There is no reason why every American couldn't have a very nice house filled with refrigerators and television screens. No reason why he can't have a beautiful car and money in the bank and no worries. This is the main thing. This is the thing that crushes people is over the years, is that people are constantly concerned about, as you say, about paying the rent and paying for this and paying for that. So people wonder, how can it be maintained day in, day out by the oligarchs that we all have to struggle while they spend their lives living in leisure and, as Prince Andrew does, running around the planet raping little girls? How can that possibly be the case? And does it have to be the case? What I want people to understand is that it's about hierarchy. And this is, I found from the very beginning, is the most difficult thing to explain to a working man. It's about hierarchy and status. If you say to a working man, oh, don't you know that what they do is they start a war and then they sell weapons to both sides to make money? A working man gets that. That does not go over the head of a working man because, yeah, sure, he understands it. You want to make money, you want to sell guns, start a war, sell them to both sides. Yeah, that is simple. It's not so simple when you're trying to explain that it's about privilege. What I did right from the very beginning, when the movie first went viral and first really began to be talked about on the Rodrigo Soto show, Ed, was to try and say to people, look, you must have seen at some time a race course and looked at the stands at a race course. Because certainly if you go to any British race course, what you see there in front of you is the strata of society as it now exists. You have at the bottom tier the working class, and they're standing there with a warm beer and a ham sandwich. Above them, you'll see the middle class. And what are they doing? They're having a whiskey, maybe a gin, and they'll be eating a cocktail. They'll be having a nice salad. Then above that, you'll see the people who've paid anything up to £20,000 or £30,000 for one afternoon sitting next to the Queen in a situation where they will be having nothing but champagne and lobster. And that is what it all comes down to. If society's leaders were to allow this war economy that we have to dissipate and a peace economy to come in and fill its place, the most basic thing that would happen is that the working class would become very, very wealthy. But think what that would do to that situation at the racecourse. You would have plumbers, bus drivers, private investigators like you turning up in helicopters and saying, well, look, it's starting to rain. We want to go inside and we want to go up the top there and have champagne and lobster. And there'd be some guard saying, oh, you can't go up there. The Queen's up there. She's paid 30 grand for a seat. And people saying, well, so what? I've got 30 grand. Here's 30 grand. I want to go up there. It would get to the point where the British royal family would be pushed out of the best seats in the house. And that's what it's all about. The royal family walk into the best seats at Wimbledon. They walk into the best seats at the US Open tennis. They walk into the best seats wherever they go, and they fly on private airlines where they don't have to be bothered, with seat room and leg room. It's all about privilege and status. The rich cannot stand the idea. The average listener who's listening to my voice now has no idea how intolerable the thought is of having to share their life with what they consider to be ordinary people, because they look down on us as a farmer looks down on his farm animals. We are just a resource. My brain, your talents, anybody who can, do welding, anybody who can be a good nurse, any farmer who can grow food, we are looked upon by the super rich as being nothing more than a resource which is there to make them money, which makes them more powerful, so they can then make even more money. And that is what keeps the structure of society intact. That is why, as you say, rents are always going up. That's why there's always something to worry about. That's why they constantly tell us that there's a terrorist threat when there isn't at all. And that's been proved a dozen times over. So that is what it all comes down to. And I'm really glad that you raised that. I've tried to compress it and keep it short. Maybe it'll be easier for people to digest. But I want Americans to know that all of this phenomenal, hideous homelessness, all of this violence against people, this taking away of the freedoms, none of it is necessary. It is being maintained by dirty oligarchs, and the only way we're ever going to fix this broken society is to remove the establishment. It can't be done in any other way.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because people wonder why is this, you see all this pedophilia in these high places, and again, it's that spirit of exploitation that again runs rampant in their blood, in their bloodlust, which is why they've chosen an industry such as the war industry. They could do this con game with any industry. It doesn't have to be war, but they've chosen war, which is a shedding of blood. Now we're out of time for this segment, but we're going to have a Francis Richard Conolly. I know.
Everybody does this with my name.
Francis Richard Conolly is the name. And we're talking about the book, JFK to 9/11, Everything's a Rich Man's Game. You can get it at trineday.com or just go online and pick it up there. It's available all over the place. We'll be right back with our second segment of Francis Richard Conolly. Thank you so much.